Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to part 6, or video number 6 of our unit on supply and demand. I'm Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. Today, we're going to talk about equilibrium. We're also going to discuss the concepts of shortage and surplus. So hold on to your hats, and here we go. So in equilibrium, what is that? It is the magic place that everyone wants to be. Equilibrium is like total good times, okay? It's the condition that exists when quantity supplied and quantity demanded are equal. At equilibrium, there is no tendency for price to change. It's the sweet spot. It's the spot you want to be, okay? Shortage is otherwise known as excess demand. It's the condition that exists when quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied at a current price, okay, or at the current price. Surplus is it, or otherwise known as an excess supply, is the condition that exists when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded at the current price. Okay, so I want you to take a look at these terms here. Pause the video if you need to. Write them down so that you can reference them as we go through the rest of the lesson. Okay, three very, very important concepts. Okay, so market, equilibrium, supply and demand. And this is just an example of Xbox, so good times for that. All right, so there we go. There's our supply and demand diagrams. Yay, you see them together. Isn't that exciting? All right, so what is point G? Let's look. Do we really want to be at point G? I don't know. We'll talk about that. Oh, there's little g. There's big G. There's little g. How exciting is that? And then we have A and little a, right? Now, where we want to be is at point E. The equilibrium. That's where we want to be, because big A and little a and big G and little g are not actually good places to be for everyone. It's not efficient. The quantity supplied does not equal the quantity demanded. We're not big fans of that. We don't want to be there. We want to be at the sweet spot in point E. That's where everything is equal, okay? So excess demand happens here, okay? That's a shortage. It's the condition that exists when quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied at the current price, okay? Now, so when quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied, prices will rise until equilibrium is restored, all things being equal. As we move forward and we start to understand these concepts, you will see how this isn't always the case for a variety of reasons, namely government policies. So you'll see how government policies can really mess with the supply and demand for better or for worse. Okay, but in this instance, we have an excess demand. There's a shortage, right? A lot of people want it, but there's just not enough of it. Okay? So this is all the stuff that's out there, and this is what people are wanting because the price is low. Now, if you allow the price to tick up, fewer people are going to want it. They want it at 175. Not as many want it at 250. So it's going to equal out. Okay? Excess supply. Opposite principle applies. There's an equilibrium point there. And then, oh, look. We have us a surplus. This is what's supplied, but this is what people want. So not many people want that thing at $3. So these are the people who are going to buy that at $3. And so there's a large amount left over. So what will happen is the price will drop until we reach that happy price at 250, okay? All things equal, the market will force the price to drop. So changes in equilibrium. Ooh, what happens? Changes in equilibrium. This is when we have shifts in either of the curves, sometimes both. Okay, an increase in demand leads to a higher equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. So if you have increase in quantity demanded, which would be a movement along the demand curve, say a move from this point to this point, right? No, we're talking about an increase in demand, big picture. So you're talking about the curve is shifting outward because you have an increase in demand. So you have to be very careful to pay attention to the terminology. Okay, this is going to result in a higher equilibrium quantity, and you're going to have a new equilibrium because of that. Okay, so if you look at this is where we started. We started here, but because we had an increase in demand, that shifts the equilibrium here. So this is E0, I guess, if you're starting out with zeros here. E0 is here. P0 is here. Q0 is here. But once the demand increases, then we have a new equilibrium. This becomes E1. The price goes up, and the quantity also goes up. Okay? Now, an increase in supply causes some similar things to happen to the graph. Again, not an increase in quantity supplied, which would be a movement along the curve. No, this is an increase in supply, so we shift the entire line outward. That's going to result in a lower equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. Okay, so we see here, this was E0. We shift to E1. Quantity goes up, price goes down. Now, let's do the opposite. If you have a decrease in demand, that is also going to change the equilibrium, both the price and the quantity. So see what's going to happen here. We're going to move from this equilibrium, E0, to E1. Price has dropped, so has quantity, because we had a decrease in demand. You come over here to a decrease in supply. Okay, the supply goes this way. We have a new equilibrium, an increase in price, and a decrease in quantity. So, supply and demand equilibrium. Equilibrium in a competitive market, when the quantity demanded of a good equals the quantity supplied. All things being equal, if you just leave things alone, consumers and producers will settle on a price just via the invisible hand. If the price is too high, the invisible hand will force that price down, or that producer will go out of business. Okay, if the price is too cheap, then it's going to force that price up and force consumers to either pay more of the good or not buy it. The price at which this idea takes place is the equilibrium price. Okay? Every buyer finds a seller and vice versa. The quantity of the good bought and sold at that price is the equilibrium quantity. Very important. So, finding the equilibrium price and quantity, how exactly does that work? Let's put the supply curve and the demand curve up again. Okay, here we go. And there's our equilibrium. We have our supply, we have our demand. So, we have point E, and that's where the supply and demand intersect. Very important, equilibrium. Remember it. All right. So in equilibrium, the quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied. We've talked about this before. Okay. And in this particular situation, it's 250 and 8,000. Okay. Equilibrium price is 250. Equilibrium quantity is 8,000. Okay. So why would the market price fall if it's above equilibrium? Let's explore this. And think about, what is this called? What is this? What is this? If you have excess supply, what do you have? It's a surplus, I'm sorry. It's a surplus. So let's say the market price of 350 is above the equilibrium price of 250, right? So we should be at 250, but we're charging 350 instead. So we have a surplus of tickets. What's going to happen? Creates a surplus. Surplus will push the price down until it reaches the equilibrium of 250. There's a surplus of a good when the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. Surpluses occur when the price is above its equilibrium level, okay? People are not going to buy it at this price. These are the only people who are buying it. So you have all these extra tickets that are left over. And if you want to move that inventory out to make room for new tickets, you've got to get rid of the surplus. You've got to get rid of the excess supply. That's going to force producers to drop the price until they drop it to a point where we're at equilibrium. So why does the market price rise if it's below the equilibrium price? Because there's too many people who want it and you can't possibly fill those needs. So adjustments have to be made to the market in order to meet the needs of that market. So equilibrium price is here, right? We talked about this. 250 and 8,000. So let's say that we have an issue here because the price is too low. It's at 150, right? This creates a shortage because these are the people who want it. And that's what's available. Ooh, we have a shortage of 10,000. That's a big shortage. So this shortage will push the price up until it reaches the equilibrium price of 250. Okay, you simply have to you have to meet the demand, and the only way to do that is to raise the price. And when you raise the price, that eliminates the shortage. It eliminates the inefficiency, because you have to understand that economics is about efficiency, okay? And if you're operating up here with a surplus, or you're operating down here with a shortage, you're being inefficient with the resources. That's not good for anybody. So the market will adjust itself to reach equilibrium, if left, well, all things equal, if left alone. Shortage of a good occurs when the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied. They occur when the price is below equilibrium level. So, changes in supply and demand. What happens when the demand curve shifts? Let's look at an example. Coffee and tea are substitute goods, okay? That means that if you can't have coffee, you'll drink tea. If you can't have tea, you'll drink coffee, okay? They're substitutes. They can be exchanged for each other. If the price of tea rises, the demand for coffee will increase. If the price for tea falls, the demand for coffee will decrease. But then it brings us to our next question. How does the price of tea actually affect the market for coffee? What does that look like? Okay, well, let's stare at this. Let's take a look at this, okay? We're looking at E1, that's the original equilibrium in the market for coffee, okay? It's at the intersection of the original supply and the original demand curves, okay? Now, if you have an increase in demand for coffee, this is going to lead to a movement along the supply curve, okay? And you're going to shift to a new equilibrium. A rise in the price of tea, a substitute, shifts the demand curve rightward to its new position at D2. It's going to cause a movement along supply and a shift in the demand curve. Go back to the determinants. Remember, determinants of demand, points, price of other goods. Don't shortcut that. Don't truncate it. You got to remember that whole statement. Price of other goods, not the price of the actual good in question. Okay? A shortage exists at the original price. So the price rises and the quantity supplied increases, which results in a movement along the supply curve. A new equilibrium is reached at E2 with a higher equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. When demand for a good increases, the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity of the good both rise. This is a principle. You can count on this. So changes in supply and demand continued. What happens if the supply curve shifts? So let's look at another example. In the early 1970s, engineers learned how to put microscopic electronic components on a silicone chip. Doesn't that sound like ancient history to all of us now with our smart little iPhones? Progress in the technique has allowed even more components to be put on each chip, and for that chip to become progressively smaller. So let's look at the price of a chip, right? We have our original equilibrium, our original supply curve, our original demand curve, right? There we have it. E1, P1, Q1, S1, D1, yay. Good times. So when we have a shift, an increase in supply, that causes movement along the demand curve. So you move from E1, equilibrium 1, to equilibrium 2. Okay? A shift of the supply curve causes movement along the demand curve. It leads to a lower equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. After a technological change increases the supply of silicone chips, supply curve shifts to the right. Again, remember your determinants of supply. You must memorize the determinants. You got to memorize that stuff. Otherwise, you're going to be very confused throughout the entire course. Very important. Memorize those determinants. A surplus exists at the original price, right? So price has to fall. And because the price falls, quantity demanded increases, and that causes a movement along the demand curve. The new equilibrium is E2. We have an increase in quantity and a higher equilibrium quantity and a lower equilibrium price. This is another good rule of thumb. When supply of a good increases, the equilibrium price of the good falls and the equilibrium quantity rises. That is the end of part 6. We're going to practice some more in class, so don't panic. We're going to do some practice and it'll all work itself out. I will see y'all in part 7.